Marriage often brings with it a delicate tug-of-war between personal freedom and the demands of commitment. For many, this fragile balance can turn into a battleground where dreams and expectations collide. Greg Thompson, a dedicated husband and the accomplished CEO of Thompson Financial Services, was on the brink of unveiling a meticulously planned surprise. A romantic trip to Italy for his wife, Sarah. He hoped the getaway would reignite the spark in their relationship. But as he entered the kitchen, ready to share his plan, he was met with an unsettling tension. The scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the faint lavender aroma of candles Sarah had lit earlier. Usually, the kitchen was a place of comfort for Greg, but today it felt suffocating, weighed down by an invisible strain. Sarah stood by the sink, her hands mechanically washing dishes, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. "Hey, Sarah," Greg said, his voice warm with an effort to pierce the heavy atmosphere. "I've got a surprise for you." She turned slightly, her eyes meeting his for the briefest moment before drifting back to the soapy water. "Oh? What is it?" she asked, her voice neutral, devoid of excitement. Greg's heart raced as he prepared to reveal the getaway he'd poured so much thought into. "It's something special," he began, his tone hopeful. "I thought we could use a break. Just the two of us. A little trip." Instead of the joyful reaction he'd envisioned, Sarah's expression clouded. She placed the dish she was holding down with a sharp clatter and sighed heavily. "Greg, we need to talk," she said, her voice carrying an unmistakable seriousness. Greg's stomach sank. He leaned against the counter, trying to steady himself. "Of course," he replied cautiously. "What's on your mind?" Sarah dried her hands and turned to face him, her arms crossed tightly, a clear shield against the vulnerability she was about to expose. "I feel trapped," she admitted, her words hanging in the air like a storm about to break. "Trapped?" Greg echoed, struggling to mask the panic rising inside him. "In what way?" "In my roles in our life," Sarah said, her voice trembling, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I love you, Greg, but I need to rediscover who I am. Outside of being your wife, outside of being a mother. I've lost myself, and I need to find that person again." Her confession hit Greg like a physical blow. His mind reeled as memories of their wedding day flooded back. The vows they had exchanged, the dreams they had shared. How had they reached this moment? "Are you saying you want to leave me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, the words foreign and heavy. Sarah shook her head, her frown deepening. "Not necessarily," she said slowly, "but I think we need space. I think a break might be best. Maybe 6 months, no contact." Her words were like a punch to the gut. The idea of separation, the thought of Sarah exploring relationships with other men, sent a wave of nausea through Greg. "You mean, no contact? You want to see other people?" he asked, his voice betraying the turmoil within. "I need to figure things out," Sarah said softly, her voice tinged with sadness. "I don't want to feel guilty about wanting to explore my options." Greg felt anger and betrayal boiling inside him. The foundation of their life together was cracking, and he wasn't sure if it could be repaired. How could she even consider this? What about us? What about the vows we made? Greg stared at Sarah, his mind racing as her face tightened with frustration. "I'm not saying I don't love you," she said, her voice edged with emotion. "I just need time to figure out who I am, without the constant expectations of being a wife and a mother weighing on me." They stood in the kitchen, the air between them thick with tension, as their conversation veered into uncharted emotional waters. Greg's heart pounded in his chest, his fear of losing her growing stronger with every word she spoke. He struggled to find something, anything, to say that might bridge the widening chasm between them. Their once solid foundation now felt shaky and unstable, leaving him to wrestle with the growing reality that their marriage was unraveling. The weight of Sarah's proposal hung in the air, stark and unyielding, a painful reminder of the rift between them. Greg's thoughts raced as he tried to process her shocking words. 6 months apart?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "You really want that?" "It's not what I want, Greg," Sarah replied, her eyes filled with a mix of pain and determination. "It's what I need." Greg shook his head in disbelief, her words stinging like a physical blow. "You need to explore relationships?" he echoed, the incredulity in his voice rising. "Are you saying you want to date other men while we're still married? How is that even fair?" Her brow furrowed, and frustration etched itself into her features. "This isn't about fairness, Greg," she said firmly. "It's about self-discovery. I've lost sight of who I am, what I want out of life. I need to figure that out, and this marriage has made it impossible for me to do that." Her confession weighed heavily on him, pressing against his chest like a physical burden. Betrayal coursed through him like waves crashing against the shore. How could she see this as a path to growth? What about their vows, their commitment to each other? "Do our vows mean so little to you?" he asked, his voice raw with emotion. "How can you just walk away from everything we've built?" "I'm not walking away from our marriage," Sarah countered, her tone rising in frustration. "I'm stepping back to find myself again. I need to understand who I am outside of this life, outside of being your wife, outside of being their mother. We're not kids anymore, Greg. We should be able to handle this like adults." Greg felt as though he were standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into an endless abyss. The word maturely rang hollow in his ears. He couldn't fathom what she was asking of him. "So, you think it's okay to be with other men while we're still married?" he pressed, his voice trembling. Her face softened slightly, though her resolve remained. "Yes," she admitted quietly. "But that doesn't mean I don't love you. I'm not trying to replace you. I'm just trying to find myself again. Can't you understand that?" The silence that followed was deafening, the tension between them palpable. Greg's heart pounded as he tried to wrap his mind around her words, the image of her with someone else tearing at his soul. "What if you don't come back?" he whispered, his voice laced with vulnerability. "I will come back," Sarah replied, her tone softer now, almost pleading. "But I need to know that I can. I need this time to figure it out." The conversation shifted to logistics, with Sarah outlining her plans for their separation. She spoke of finding an apartment and taking classes to explore her interests, each detail cutting into Greg like a fresh wound. He listened, stunned and disbelieving, as the reality of their situation began to sink in. "What about the kids?" he asked, his voice shaking. "How do we explain this to them? What do we say?" "We'll figure it out together," Sarah said, though her confidence wavered. "I don't want to hurt them, but I think they deserve honesty. They'll understand, eventually." Greg's head spun as he tried to process the crumbling image of their family. The laughter, the love, all of it seemed to shatter before his eyes. A knot of anxiety twisted in his stomach as he contemplated what this separation would mean. Could they ever repair the cracks in their marriage? Or was this the beginning of the end? As the evening wore on, Greg found himself questioning everything. Their love, their promises, and the life they had built together. The vows they had exchanged felt like a distant memory, replaced by a painful uncertainty about the road ahead. Each moment deepened his sense of loss, leaving him to face the looming reality of life without Sarah, the woman he had loved, trusted, and built his life around. Unable to contain the storm of emotions any longer, Greg finally confronted her. "How can you even think about being with someone else?" he demanded, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and desperation. "You're asking me to accept that you'll be intimate with other men while we're still married." Sarah's expression hardened, a defensive edge creeping into her tone. "I'm not asking you to accept it," she replied. "I'm asking you to understand that this is something I need to do for myself. It's not about replacing you. It's about finding who I am outside of this marriage." Her words settled over Greg like a heavy weight, the betrayal sinking deeper into his chest. He stared at her, searching for something, anything, that might bring him clarity. But all he could feel was the unbearable pain of losing the woman he thought he knew. "You're just going to throw away everything we've built together?" Greg shouted, his voice raw with frustration. "Our life, our kids. Does any of it even matter to you if you can walk away so easily?" "It's not that simple, Greg," Sarah retorted, her voice trembling as anger and pain mixed. You're making this all about you, but it's not just about you. I've lost myself in being your wife and the kid's mother. I want to feel whole again. But you can't just leave me like this, he countered, despair coloring every word. You're asking me to stand by and watch you walk away, possibly to fall in love with someone else. What am I supposed to do with that? Their voices rose, emotions spilling over in a cacophony of hurt and misunderstanding. As Greg's mind raced, memories of their life together played like a cruel montage. Dancing in the kitchen, laughter at the dinner table, quiet moments spent watching their children grow. All those memories now felt tainted, overshadowed by the stark reality of Sarah's decision. Why can't you see that I'm trying to do this the right way? Sarah pleaded, her voice cracking under the weight of her emotions. This isn't just about wanting to leave you. It's about needing space to figure out who I am without all this pressure. Greg's anger flared as he stepped closer, his voice dropping to a strained whisper. You're talking about infidelity, Sarah. How can you justify this? How can you call it growth when you're putting our entire family on the line? As the confrontation deepened, despair washed over Greg, relentless and unyielding. The thought of Sarah being with someone else gnawed at him, an ache that burrowed deep and refused to fade. You think you can just go off, have your fun, find whatever it is you're looking for, and then come back when it suits you? Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Instead, her eyes welled with tears as she shook her head, sorrow and frustration mingling on her face. I don't want to hurt you, Greg, she said, her voice trembling, but I can't keep pretending everything is fine when it's not. I need this for me. You have to let me go. Her words hit Greg like a hammer, shattering what little hope he had left. Anger surged through him, fueled by desperation. So this is it? He asked, his voice breaking. You just walk away, and I'm supposed to be okay with it? The finality of her decision loomed over them like a dark storm cloud. Greg's voice cracked as he implored her. What about our vows, Sarah? What do they mean to you? Sarah didn't answer. Her silence spoke volumes, her eyes heavy with the weight of their shared history and the painful truth of her desires. In that moment, Greg realized this wasn't just a temporary separation. It was the beginning of a profound change in their lives. The walls of their relationship, once strong and steady, now felt fragile and paper-thin, trembling under the pressure of their emotional upheaval. The tension between them reached its breaking point. Overwhelmed, Sarah turned away, her emotions too much to bear. Greg stood frozen, his heart racing as the air around him seemed to grow colder. Their argument echoed in the empty kitchen, leaving behind an unsettling silence, a lingering reminder of the life they once shared and the pain of what was now slipping away. In the months following their separation, Greg and Sarah embarked on individual journeys of self-discovery, each forced to confront the harsh realities of their choices. For Greg, the office became his refuge, a place where he could lose himself in work and momentarily escape the emotional turmoil that had consumed his life. The space that once symbolized success now became a sanctuary, a distraction from the pain of losing Sarah. At home, Greg threw himself into redecorating, hoping to breathe new life into the house that felt unbearably empty without her. But as the days turned into weeks, the weight of her absence settled heavily on his chest. Even amid the hum of the office or the fresh look of his surroundings, memories of their life together haunted him. The laughter they had shared, the quiet evenings with their children. Those vibrant moments now felt faded and distant, leaving behind only an aching sense of loss. Meanwhile, Sarah moved into her new apartment, determined to embrace the fresh start she had longed for. Excitement mingled with trepidation as she began exploring classes and activities to reconnect with herself outside the confines of marriage. Each new experience brought a sense of freedom, yet it was accompanied by the emotional weight of being apart from her family. Attempts to connect with their children were met with resistance. They missed their father and the life they had always known, leaving Sarah feeling increasingly isolated. Late-night conversations with friends offered brief moments of solace, but guilt and uncertainty lingered. The image of her children's confused, Tear-streaked faces haunted her during moments of quiet, a painful reminder of the cost of her choices. Sarah often found herself trapped in an endless loop of doubt, questioning the choices she had made. Had this so-called freedom been worth the pain it caused her family? The answer never came easily. As the months of separation dragged on, both she and Greg began to change in profound ways. Greg discovered a new sense of independence. He started spending more time with colleagues, immersing himself in the social circles he had largely neglected during his marriage. His evenings filled with long hours at the office and laughter at after-work gatherings. Yet, despite the distractions, a hollow emptiness lingered, a void that no amount of activity could fill. For Sarah, the thrill of self-discovery was often overshadowed by the harsh reality of her fractured family. The classes she took reignited her creative spark, but the joy she sought was fleeting, slipping through her fingers like sand. More often than not, it was replaced by a deep longing for the connection she once shared with Greg and the children. Despite the physical distance, an emotional thread still tied them together, tugging at their hearts when they least expected it. Both found themselves caught in reflective moments, thinking back on the life they had built and questioning the paths they now walked. As the 6-month mark approached, a simmering tension grew beneath the surface. The changes they had undergone shaped them in ways neither had anticipated, and with the looming decision about their future, the stakes felt impossibly high. Greg, emboldened by his newfound independence, began to wonder if he could ever return to the dynamics of their past. Meanwhile, Sarah wrestled with the reality that the freedom she craved had come at a devastating cost. The separation loomed over them like a specter, its presence a constant reminder of what they stood to lose or gain. The day they were set to meet at the lawyer's office arrived far too quickly. Greg got there early, his heart pounding as he sat in the waiting room. The past few months had been a whirlwind of adaptation, but the finality of this moment hit him like a tidal wave. As he waited, his mind replayed their last conversation, the one that had set them on this path. The idea of officially ending their marriage felt unbearably heavy. When Sarah walked into the room, her expression was a mixture of resolve and vulnerability. Seeing her stirred a maelstrom of emotions in Greg: love, anger, regret, each fighting for dominance. They exchanged hesitant greetings, their words brittle and formal, before sitting down across from one another. The air between them was thick with unspoken feelings, the weight of everything they had been through pressing down on both of them. As the lawyer began to go over the paperwork, Greg felt a surge of something he couldn't suppress. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to meet Sarah's gaze. "I know about the other men," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "You can't expect me to just walk away without addressing that." Sarah's face froze, her eyes widening in shock. "Greg, He cut her off, his voice firm. "You need to understand how deeply you've hurt me. I thought we were working through this. But instead, you went behind my back." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as she struggled to respond. "I never meant to hurt you," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought I needed to explore to figure out who I was. I didn't think it would lead to this." Greg shook his head, the weight of her words pressing down on him. "And yet here we are," he said softly, his heart aching. The pain between them felt almost tangible, lingering in the air like a storm cloud that refused to move. As the lawyer continued speaking, the intensity of the moment came to a head. Greg felt something shift inside him, a desperate plea for clarity and closure. "I just wanted us to be happy," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "To be whole again. But I can't do this anymore." Sarah leaned forward, her face etched with sorrow. "I'm sorry, Greg," she said, her voice trembling. "I see now how selfish I've been. I want to fix this, I really do. But I don't know if you can ever forgive me." Her words hung in the air, a mix of regret and hope. Greg sat in silence, his mind racing. The journey of their separation had revealed new paths for both of them, but it had also uncovered a betrayal that left scars he wasn't sure would ever heal. Now, standing at this crossroads, he faced the most difficult decision of his life. Greg stood motionless, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. It was a choice, one that would define not just the future of his relationship with Sarah but the course of his own life. With a deep breath, he rose to his feet, determination surging through him like a tide. "I need to move forward, Sarah," he said, his voice steady. "I can't go back to the way things were." His words hung in the air, heavy with finality. Greg turned and walked away, leaving Sarah behind to face the consequences of the choices she had made. As he stepped outside, the sunlight felt different, warmer, brighter, as though it carried the promise of a new beginning. In the days that followed, Greg began to rebuild his life. He found comfort and support in new relationships, particularly with Tara and Greta, whose companionship became a cornerstone of his healing journey. Their understanding presence offered him the stability he needed as he navigated the uncharted waters of single fatherhood and a life reshaped by heartbreak. For Greg, the process of moving forward was gradual, yet it was also profoundly transformative. He began embracing his newfound independence, rediscovering passions and pursuits he had long put aside. At work, he poured his energy into Thompson Financial Services, propelling the company to unprecedented success. These professional triumphs became a beacon of hope, a reminder that life could still hold meaning and purpose despite the pain he had endured. At home, Greg prioritized his children, dedicating weekends to outings and adventures that created lasting memories. Their laughter became a balm for his wounded heart, and in those joyful moments, he felt a sense of fulfillment that had eluded him for so long. Slowly but surely, Greg realized that resilience wasn't just about surviving heartache. It was about rediscovering the richness of life in its aftermath. Meanwhile, Sarah faced a starkly different reality. The initial thrill of freedom that had driven her decisions began to wane, replaced by a persistent loneliness that weighed heavily on her. The connections she had hoped to forge felt shallow, and the emptiness of her new life grew harder to ignore. Attempts to reconnect with her children were met with resistance, their confusion and hurt erecting walls that Sarah couldn't seem to break through. Each interaction served as a painful reminder of what she had willingly left behind: the love, the warmth, the sense of belonging. As the months passed, Sarah found herself haunted by the same questions. Could she have done things differently? Was there a way to repair the damage she had caused? Or had her pursuit of independence come at too great a cost? The paths Greg and Sarah walked continued to diverge, yet the echoes of their shared past remained with them both. Greg's journey of self-discovery brought him a renewed sense of purpose, while Sarah's was clouded by regret and longing. Each was learning that growth often came with a price, a lesson steeped in complexity and the bittersweet realities of love and betrayal. As time went on, Greg began to find solace in the life he was building outside the marriage that had once defined him. He learned to value the strength he had gained and the lessons etched into his heart. Sarah, on the other hand, grappled with the realization that her quest for independence had fractured her family in ways she couldn't easily mend. In the end, their journeys reflected the unpredictable nature of love and the transformative power of choice. Greg and Sarah carried the scars of their past, but those scars also served as symbols of their resilience. Each step forward became a testament to the lessons they had learned and the lives they continued to shape. Though their paths no longer intertwined, they moved forward, both forever changed by their experiences, yet hopeful for the futures that awaited them. The complexities of their journey underscored the truth that while love can wound, it also carries the potential for profound growth and renewal. If you think this story resonates, leave a comment with the number 1. If not, consider subscribing to the channel, and don't forget to hit the like button if you found this video helpful.